He was mocked for his rusty, sputtering car, a relic from another time. "Hey Arthur, you sure that thing can make it home?" Marcus sneered, his friends laughing as they filmed the old janitor for their social media. Arthur simply offered a tired smile, his hands stained with grease and grime, and drove his old sedan out of the pristine parking garage of Oratech Innovations, their cruel laughter echoing behind him. They saw a nobody, a ghost in the halls who cleaned up their messes. But the next morning, as Marcus pulled up in his gleaming sports car, a deafening whir filled the air. A sleek, black helicopter descended from the sky, landing on the private rooftop helipad. The entire office rushed to the windows, buzzing with excitement, wondering which billionaire investor was visiting. The door slid open, and a figure stepped out, his shadow casting long over the luxury cars below. It wasn't a client or an investor. It was Arthur, the janitor, and he didn't just work in the building. He owned it. The evening air at Oratech Innovations was still electric, long after the majority of its workforce had gone home. The building itself was a monument to ambition, a silent titan of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Inside, the floors were polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the recessed lighting that gave the empty halls a futuristic glow. This was Arthur's world after dark. He moved through it not with the hurried, self-important stride of the executives, but with a slow, methodical grace. The rhythmic slosh of the water in his bucket and the gentle squeak of his mop on the marble were the only sounds in the vast, cathedral-like lobby. He was polishing the large glass doors at the entrance when Liam Chen, one of the company's star programmers, burst out from the elevator bay. Liam was young, brilliant, and acutely aware of his own value. He was talking loudly into his phone, his voice echoing in the empty space. "No, the bonus was fine, but I'm already thinking about my next stock option payout. At this rate, I'll be retired by 30. He gestured emphatically with his free hand, which was holding a paper cup of artisanal coffee. A few drops sloshed over the side, landing directly on the pristine floor Arthur had just finished. Liam didn't break stride. He glanced down at the brown spots, then shot Arthur a look of pure annoyance, as if the janitor's mere presence had willed the spill into existence. "Hey, watch the floor," he snapped, before continuing his conversation and disappearing through the doors. Arthur paused, his reflection a stooped, gray figure in the gleaming glass. He said nothing. He simply unclipped the rag from his belt, knelt down, and wiped the coffee away until the marble was perfect once more. A short while later, Chloe Vance, a senior marketing manager, walked through the lobby with a junior colleague. They were dissecting a recent meeting, their voices sharp and clinical. Chloe was impeccably dressed, her heels clicking with an aggressive rhythm that demanded attention. As they passed Arthur, who was now emptying the trash receptacles, Chloe lowered her voice to a conspiratorial whisper, yet made it just loud enough for him to hear. "You know," she said with a sigh, "sometimes I almost envy people like him. Imagine having a job where you don't have to think. Just clean. No pressure, no ambition. It must be so simple." The word simple was laced with a thick layer of pity and disdain. Her colleague giggled in agreement. Arthur kept his back to them, carefully tying off the full liner. He had heard variations of that sentiment for years. He knew they didn't see a person, they saw a function, a ghost who tidied up the background of their important lives. His shift ended just before 9. After storing his cart and clocking out, he walked through the silent building towards the employee parking garage. He passed the grand wall in the lobby, where the company's motto was emblazoned in glowing silver letters: innovation, ambition, excellence. The words seemed to mock the quiet, invisible life he led within these same walls. The executive garage was a showroom of modern engineering. Gleaming Teslas, Porsches, and BMWs sat parked in brightly lit, spacious bays. Arthur's spot was in a far, neglected corner, under a flickering fluorescent light that cast long, dancing shadows. And then there was his car. It was a 1994 sedan, its once blue paint faded to the color of a dull sky. A spiderweb of rust crept out from the edge of the passenger side wheel well, and a long, pale scar from a forgotten encounter with a shopping cart marred the driver's door. But it was his. He'd bought it new, paid for it with cash, and maintained it himself for over 30 years. The inside, though worn, was immaculate. The dashboard was free of dust, and the old cloth seats were clean. He slid into the driver's seat, the familiar scent of old vinyl and pine air freshener a small comfort. He was about to turn the key when a burst of laughter cut through the quiet hum of the garage. Marcus Thorne, the company's top sales director, was leaning against his brand-new, silent electric supercar, a vehicle that looked more like a spaceship than a car. With him were Chloe and Liam. They were the company's golden children, the triumvirate of youthful success, and they had just spotted Arthur. The sputtering cough of Arthur's engine turning over was all it took to draw their fire. Marcus pushed himself off his car and sauntered over, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. He circled Arthur's sedan slowly, as if it were a strange, pathetic animal in a zoo. Well, what do we have here?" he announced, his voice dripping with theatricality. "An actual fossil. Arthur, I've seen museum exhibits in better condition than this." Chloe, never one to miss a social media opportunity, had her phone out instantly. "Oh, Marcus, you're terrible," she said, though the wide grin on her face told a different story. She began filming. "This is just too good. My followers won't believe what people drive to a billion-dollar company." #blast from the past. Liam, buoyed by the audience, stepped forward. "Seriously, Arthur," he said, his tone a poor imitation of genuine concern. "My signing bonus alone could buy 100 of these. Do yourself a favor and sell it for scrap. You might get enough for a bus pass for the year." The laughter grew louder. A few other employees, heading to their own cars, slowed down to watch the spectacle. No one intervened. They were either intimidated by Marcus's status or simply entertained by the casual cruelty. Arthur felt the weight of their stares. He was trapped in the driver's seat, a king on a broken throne, as the jeers rained down. He kept his eyes fixed on the windshield, his hands gripping the steering wheel. His knuckles were white. He had weathered countless storms in his life, boardroom battles, hostile takeovers, market crashes, but this intimate, personal humiliation felt uniquely sharp. They weren't just mocking a car, they were mocking a life they couldn't possibly understand. They saw rust and decay, and in their minds, it was a reflection of the man inside. Marcus leaned down, putting on a show of mock concern as he tapped one of the tires with the toe of his expensive leather shoe. The tire wheezed softly. "Seriously, Arthur, are these things even safe? I'd hate for a blowout to happen on the freeway." "You could scratch someone's paint," he said, winking at Chloe's phone. The small crowd of onlookers tittered. The cruelty was now entertainment. The focus of their scorn shifted from the car to the man. Chloe zoomed in, her phone's camera uncomfortably close to Arthur's window, capturing his withered hands on the steering wheel. "Look at those hands," she narrated in a hushed, dramatic tone for her video. "Decades of hard work, and for what? To end up with this." She panned slowly from his hands to the rusted door panel. Liam, emboldened, leaned against the hood, crossing his arms. "I bet he lives in one of those sad, little apartments out by the highway. Probably eats canned soup for dinner and dreams about what it's like to be one of us." The jab was surgical, designed to strip away not just his professional value but his personal dignity. They were no longer just arrogant colleagues, they were bullies, systematically dismantling an old man's worth in a public forum. Inside the car, the world seemed to shrink down to the smirking faces framed by his window. For a fleeting second, a fire Arthur hadn't felt in years flickered deep within him. An acidic rage burned in his throat. He remembered standing in boardrooms where men twice as powerful as Marcus Thorne trembled when he spoke. He remembered making decisions that shifted markets and built empires from nothing. His hand, the one Chloe had just mocked, tightened on the gearshift. His knuckles turned white. He could end this all right now. He could step out of the car, stand tall, and utter the 4 simple words that would shatter their universe: "You are all fired." He pictured their faces, the shock, the confusion, the dawning, horrifying realization. The power to ruin them was right there, a word away. But then, just as quickly as it came, the fire subsided, replaced by the cool patience that had become his armor. He unclenched his fist. This was not the way. This raw, unfiltered ugliness was precisely what he had come to find. For 2 years, he had walked these halls, cleaned these floors, invisible, wanting to see the true soul of the company he had created. And here it was, exposed under the flickering garage lights. This humiliation was a data point, the most painful and valuable one yet. He had to see it through to its conclusion. His silence, however, was gasoline on Marcus's ego-fueled fire. Seeing no fight in the old man, Marcus felt invincible. He turned from the car to address his audience, puffing out his chest. "You see," he proclaimed, gesturing grandly between Arthur's sedan and his own silent, electric beast. "This is the difference. At Oratech, we are apex predators. We drive the future." He patted the hood of his sports car. "We don't settle for mediocrity. We don't accept decay." He then turned and gave Arthur's front tire a light kick. The car shuddered. "This," he said, his voice dripping with finality, "is the mindset of a loser. It's obsolete. And in our world, the obsolete get left behind." As he spoke, his eyes caught something on Arthur's dashboard, a crisp, cream-colored invitation. With a theatrical flourish, he reached through the open driver's side window and plucked it from where it was tucked. "Well, what do you know?" he said, holding it up for everyone to see. It was an invitation to the annual Founders' Day Gala, a lavish, black-tie event to celebrate the company's reclusive and mysterious founder, a figure no one had ever met. "Don't tell me you were actually planning on going to this, Arthur." The idea was so absurd to him that his laughter was genuine and booming. "What would you even do there? They'd probably make you work the coat check." An idea, cruel and brilliant, lit up his eyes. He was going to turn this humiliation into his masterpiece. "I'll tell you what," Marcus announced, his voice echoing through the concrete garage. He was in his element, the center of attention, the master of ceremonies. "I bet you $1,000 you don't even have the guts to show up. But if you do," he leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, "I want you to park this thing," he gestured to the sedan, "right at the main entrance. Valet circle. Right next to my Porsche. Let everyone at the gala, all the executives, all the board members, see what the absolute bottom of this company looks like." The challenge hung in the air, audacious and impossibly cruel. Chloe gasped with delight, ensuring her camera captured every second. "Oh my God, Marcus, you're a legend." "A dare." Liam chimed in, "He'll never do it. He'd die of embarrassment before he got out of the car." Every eye was now on Arthur. The air was thick with their judgment, their certainty. They had backed him into a corner, leaving him with two options: accept the impossible, humiliating challenge, or refuse and confirm his status as the coward they believed him to be. The weight of their expectation was immense. For the first time, Arthur moved. He slowly turned his head and looked directly at Marcus. His eyes were not angry, nor were they defeated. They were calm, clear, and held a depth that Marcus, in his arrogance, mistook for emptiness. Arthur didn't say a word. He simply turned his gaze back to the windshield, put the car in drive, and with a protesting groan from the engine, began to pull away. "That's what I thought. No guts." Marcus yelled after him, his voice triumphant. "Guess you know your place after all, old man." The group erupted in cheers and laughter, celebrating their victory. They watched as the two dim, red taillights of the old sedan slowly faded and disappeared into the city night. They were sure they had broken him. They had no idea they had just sealed their own fate. "Hey, before we see what happens next, can I ask a quick favor? We've all felt like Arthur at some point, underestimated, judged by our appearance, or made to feel small. If you believe that a person's true worth lies beneath the surface and you're rooting for him to show them who he really is, then hit that subscribe button right now. Join us. By subscribing, you become part of a community that celebrates the underdog, and you won't miss the moment of sweet justice that's coming. Let's get back to the story. The Founders' Day Gala was the crown jewel of the Oratech social calendar, an evening of performative opulence held at a historic art museum. Its grand marble staircase and vaulted ceilings were bathed in the company's signature blue and silver light. A plush red carpet flowed from the curb, flanked by velvet ropes that held back a throng of tech journalists and society photographers. The air was thick with expensive perfume and the low thrum of self-congratulation. One by one, the titans of the industry arrived, stepping out of cars that whispered of wealth rather than shouting it. Valets in crisp uniforms moved with practiced efficiency, whisking away vehicles that cost more than most people's homes. Into this sea of elegance, Marcus Thorne's Porsche screamed. He timed his arrival for peak visibility, the car's aggressive engine a deliberate disruption. He emerged from the driver's seat with the smug confidence of a man who believed the world was his stage. Chloe and Liam followed, dressed to the nines and radiating the same arrogant energy. Chloe immediately began a live stream, her phone held high. "We have arrived," she announced to her followers. "The biggest night in tech, and you know we're at the center of it." As Marcus handed his keys to a valet, he made a grand show of scanning the long line of cars. "Well, Chloe, I don't see any antique road hazards here," he said, his voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Looks like our friend Arthur decided to stay home with his canned soup after all. Can't say I blame him." Liam snickered. The $1,000 was probably more than his car is even worth. He made a smart business decision. They posed for the cameras, their laughter sharp and dismissive. They were untouchable, secure in their place at the top of the food chain, and the janitor's humiliation was the perfect appetizer for their evening. Inside the grand hall, standing near a towering marble statue, Julian Croft watched the peacocking display with a quiet sense of weariness. As one of the original board members, he had known the company since its inception, back when it was just an idea in a garage. He remembered a time when humility and innovation were the driving forces, not flashy cars and public mockery. He'd overheard two junior analysts gossiping excitedly about the dare Marcus had issued in the parking garage. Julian's frown deepened. It was a sickness, this casual cruelty, and it was rotting the company from the inside out. He adjusted his tuxedo, a silent vow forming in his mind to address this toxic culture at the next board meeting. It was then that the atmosphere began to change. A new sound pierced the elegant bubble of the gala. It was faint at first, a rhythmic, pulsing beat that was felt as much as it was heard. It was not music. It was something deeper, more powerful. Guests paused mid-conversation, tilting their heads. Outside, the valets stopped their work, their eyes scanning the dark, starless sky. The photographers lowered their cameras, their instincts telling them the real story was no longer on the red carpet. The sound grew, a deafening, chest-rattling whomp-whomp-whomp that seemed to shake the very foundations of the old museum. It was the unmistakable sound of a heavy-rotor helicopter, and it was getting closer. This was not a police chopper or a news aircraft. The sound was too clean, too powerful. It was military-grade, a machine built for precision and power. The crowd of guests began to spill out of the entrance, their faces a mixture of confusion and excitement. Chloe was in her element, her phone panning across the chaotic scene. "You guys, this is insane. Someone is making the most epic entrance I have ever seen. Who is it?" Marcus stood beside her, his arms crossed, a flicker of irritation on his face. He hated it when someone else had a bigger moment than him. The helicopter appeared, a black specter against the city lights. It was an Augusta Westland AW-109, a machine known for its speed, silence, and use by special forces and the ultra-elite. It didn't circle or approach cautiously. It descended with a confident, aggressive purpose, its searchlight cutting a sharp cone through the darkness, sweeping over the terrified valets and the stunned, black-tie crowd. Security guards were shouting into their radios, their well-laid plans for the evening dissolving into chaos. This arrival was not on any schedule. In a breathtaking display of piloting skill, the helicopter didn't aim for a nearby clearing or rooftop. It descended directly into the center of the museum's grand, circular driveway. The target was the massive, ornate fountain at its heart, the exact spot Marcus had designated as the ultimate stage for Arthur's humiliation. The rotor wash hit the water like a hurricane, sending explosive plumes of spray 50 feet into the air, drenching the pristine red carpet and the front row of onlookers. Guests screamed and shielded their faces. With impossible grace, the helicopter's landing skids touched down on the wide, stone rim of the fountain, settling with a firm, final thud. The powerful turbine engines began to wind down, but the energy of its arrival still crackled in the air. The entire gala had come to a dead stop. Every guest, every journalist, every employee from the mailroom clerk to the CEO was frozen, their attention completely and utterly fixed on the black aircraft perched like a predator in the center of their world. Then, with a smooth, electronic hiss, the main cabin door slid open. The interior was dark, but a single, soft light from within cast the figure in the doorway in perfect silhouette. It was a man, standing tall and still, surveying the scene of silent, gaping faces before him. For a long, heart-stopping moment, he did not move. The entire world, it seemed, was holding its breath. The man in the silhouette stepped forward, out of the helicopter's dark cabin and into the harsh glare of the museum's spotlights. 1,000 frantic thoughts and wild theories died in an instant, replaced by a single, impossible truth. It was Arthur. But it was an Arthur none of them had ever seen. The tired, stooped posture of the janitor was gone, replaced by a ramrod-straight spine that radiated quiet authority. The drab, gray work uniform had been supplanted by a bespoke charcoal suit, tailored with such precision that it seemed an extension of the man himself. It was a suit that whispered of generational wealth, not of a recent bonus. On his wrist, a simple but elegant Patek Philippe watch caught the light, its understated design a stark contrast to the flashy, diamond-studded timepieces favored by men like Marcus. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and his face, now clean-shaven, revealed a strong jawline and eyes that were not weary, but sharp, intelligent, and piercing. He was not a man who cleaned floors. He was a man who built the buildings. A collective, audible gasp swept through the crowd, a wave of pure, unadulterated shock. Then, an unnerving silence fell, broken only by the slowing whine of the helicopter's rotors and the soft patter of water dripping from the fountain. People stared, their minds struggling to reconcile the two completely contradictory images of the man before them. The humble janitor and the powerful magnate. It was a paradox that simply did not compute. They looked for signs of a joke, a prank, a costume, but found none. The authority radiating from Arthur was too real, too palpable. At the front of the line, the antagonists were paralyzed. Marcus Thorne's smug, arrogant smirk had vanished, leaving his face slack and empty. His mouth hung slightly open as he stared, his brain cycling through a frantic loop of denial. No, he whispered to himself, the word barely a puff of air. No, it's impossible. It can't be. He shook his head, a small, desperate gesture, as if trying to dislodge an image that refused to make sense. Beside him, Chloe's phone, the instrument of her mockery, had fallen to her side, though her thumb had frozen on the record button. The live stream was still running, broadcasting a shaky, chaotic view of the ground to her confused followers. She was no longer a performer. She was a spectator at the ruin of her own world, her face a mask of horrified disbelief. Her carefully constructed reality was shattering in real time, and she could do nothing but watch. Liam, however, was the first to truly grasp the cataclysmic implications. He physically recoiled, stumbling back a step. The color drained from his face, leaving it a sickly, pale white. He wasn't just seeing a janitor in a suit, he was seeing the ghost of his own career. Every cruel word, every condescending sneer he had ever directed at Arthur now replayed in his mind, not as a joke, but as a self-inflicted wound. Ignoring the stunned silence, Arthur descended the helicopter's steps and set foot on the wet stone rim of the fountain. His handmade leather shoes, which cost more than Liam's first car, were immediately soaked, but he paid them no mind. He walked with a calm, unhurried gait, his eyes sweeping across the sea of faces, his expression unreadable. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't angry. He was simply present. As he approached the red carpet, the crowd, as if guided by some primal instinct, parted before him, creating a wide, silent corridor. They were making way for power. It was then that Julian Croft, the old board member, finally found his voice. He pushed through the throng of stunned executives, his eyes locked on the approaching figure. His mind had raced back 35 years, to a dusty garage where a young, intense genius had sketched out the future on a whiteboard. A man who had built an empire and then, disgusted by the fame and sycophancy that came with it, had simply walked away from the public eye, installing a CEO and becoming a ghost in his own machine. A founder known only by his name, Arthur Pendleton. "It's him," Julian breathed, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and disbelief. He grabbed the arm of the current CEO, a man who had only ever communicated with the founder through encrypted emails. "That's Pendleton. That's the Arthur." The CEO's eyes went wide. Are you certain?" But the name, once spoken, was a spark in a tinderbox. It was picked up by the nearest guests, a whisper that spread like wildfire. "Pendleton? Did he say Pendleton? The janitor is the founder?" In seconds, the entire crowd was buzzing with the unbelievable revelation. The puzzle pieces crashed into place with dizzying speed. The quiet janitor who knew every corner of the building. His silent endurance of their mockery. The dare. The impossible, audacious arrival. It wasn't a prank. It was a reckoning. The photographers, recovering from their shock, went into a frenzy, the rapid-fire clicking of their cameras sounding like a hailstorm. They had stumbled upon the scoop of the decade. The reclusive, mythical founder of Oratech was real, and he'd been hiding in plain sight. Arthur's steady walk never faltered. He passed Julian, giving him a barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement. He walked past his own CEO, who looked as if he might faint. He continued down the path the crowd had made for him, his destination never in doubt. He stopped just a few feet in front of the frozen trio of Marcus, Chloe, and Liam. The entire world seemed to shrink to that single, silent space. The air was thick with tension. Arthur looked at Marcus, his calm gaze holding the terrified eyes of the man who, just one night before, had called him a loser with no guts. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. The helicopter perched on the fountain behind him had said it all. For a long moment, Arthur simply looked at them, his silence a far more potent weapon than any shout could ever be. He allowed them to stew in the terrifying, dawning realization of what they had done. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm, measured, and carried with an effortless authority that captivated every single person present. It was the same quiet voice he used in the hallways, but now, stripped of its humble context, it was the voice of absolute power. He addressed Marcus directly, though his gaze seemed to look straight through him. "Mr. Thorne," he began, the formal title landing like a physical blow. "Last night, in the parking garage, you made a wager with me." Marcus flinched as if he'd been struck. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. Arthur continued, his tone patient, as if explaining a simple concept to a child. "The terms of your challenge, if I remember correctly, were that I was to show up to this gala. And I was to park my vehicle right here, at the front entrance, for all to see." He made a small, elegant gesture with his hand towards the billion-dollar machine resting on the fountain. "I believe this qualifies as my vehicle. And this," his gesture encompassed the drenched red carpet and the stunned faces, "is the front entrance. I have, therefore, met the conditions of your dare." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "As for the $1,000 you owe me, you can keep it." A flicker of something that might have been pity crossed his face. "Consider it your severance pay." The words, spoken so quietly, detonated in the silence. Severance. Marcus staggered back, his face a mess of confusion and panic. Wait. I didn't know," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I didn't know it was you." "And that," Arthur said, his voice hardening for the first time, "is the entire problem. You didn't know who I was, so you assumed I was nothing. You saw a simple uniform and an old car, and you decided that gave you the right to mock, to humiliate, and to discard a fellow human being. You are the director of sales, Mr. Thorne. Your entire career is predicated on your ability to correctly assess value. And you have just demonstrated, in the most public way imaginable, that your judgment is catastrophically flawed. He turned his head slightly, his eyes finding the pale, sweating face of his CEO in the crowd. Frank, such a liability is something Oratet can no longer afford. His gaze then shifted, falling upon Chloe. She visibly trembled. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice softening slightly, but losing none of its steel. "You have a remarkable talent for building a narrative. You took my humiliation and expertly packaged it as entertainment for your followers." He nodded towards the phone still clutched in her hand. "I trust you are still recording this. This moment is also content. Let it serve as a lesson for your audience on the true price of cruelty. The brand you have built for yourself is, as of this moment, dissolved." Finally, he looked at Liam, who seemed to be shrinking into himself, trying to become invisible. "Mr. Chen. A young man with a brilliant mind, whose work will help design the future. Yet you have no respect for the person who cleans up your past. Talent without empathy, Mr. Chen, is just a weapon. And you are too reckless to be trusted with it." With the sentences delivered, Arthur turned his attention to the wider audience, his voice rising just enough to be heard by all. "For 2 years, I have walked these halls as a ghost. I have cleaned your offices. I have emptied your trash. I did this because 35 years ago, I started this company with a dream, not just to innovate, but to build a place where brilliant people could collaborate with respect and dignity. But I began to fear that the soul of this company was rotting. I needed to see it for myself. I needed to know if we had become a place that valued stock prices more than people." He looked back at the 3 disgraced employees. "Tonight, you have all given me my answer." He reached into the inner pocket of his perfect suit and slowly pulled out a worn, cracked leather wallet. From it, he produced a laminated card. It was his Oratet Janitorial Services ID. His photo, tired and unassuming, stared out from the plastic. He held it up for everyone to see. "This was the most important position I have ever held at this company," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Because the man holding this card was the only one who saw the truth." Then, in a final, symbolic gesture, he let the ID card slip from his fingers. It fluttered down, landing with a soft splash in a puddle on the red carpet. His attention snapped back to his leadership. "Frank," he commanded, his voice now crisp and decisive. "Have security escort Mr. Thorne, Miss Vance, and Mr. Chen off the premises immediately. Their access to the building, their networks, and their accounts is to be revoked. Effective now." He then looked to Julian Croft, a warmth entering his eyes for the first time. "Julian, it seems you and I have a company to rebuild. Our work begins in the morning." Without a second glance at the 3 people whose careers and reputations he had just dismantled, Arthur Pendleton turned and walked towards the museum entrance. The crowd, a silent, awestruck mass, parted for him as if he were royalty. The world he had built, and nearly lost, was his once more. The moment Arthur Pendleton disappeared into the museum, the fragile silence shattered, and the scene erupted into a maelstrom of frantic energy. The air, once thick with smug celebration, was now charged with a mixture of terror and awe. Every guest was whispering, their eyes wide, their minds reeling from the seismic shift in power they had just witnessed. Tech journalists, who had come expecting a night of dull speeches and schmoozing, were now in a feeding frenzy, furiously typing on their phones or speaking in hushed, urgent tones to their editors. They knew this was not just a story about a corporate shakeup, it was a legend in the making. The tale of the Janitor King. Inside, Arthur's victory was as quiet and understated as the man himself. He did not ascend to the main stage to address the crowd. He did not bask in the glow of his triumph or seek out congratulations. Instead, he walked directly to a secluded alcove overlooking the main hall, where he was immediately joined by a visibly shaken Frank and a grimly determined Julian Croft. While the rest of the gala's attendees stared at him from a safe distance, too intimidated to approach the man they had once ignored, Arthur was already at work. His focus was immediate and absolute. "Frank," he said, his voice low and steady, I want the unedited quarterly performance reviews for every department on my desk by 7 a.m. Not the polished versions you show the board, the raw data. He then turned to Julian. And I want your honest, off-the-record assessment of every single board member. Who is dead weight, and who still remembers what this company was meant to be? There was no trace of the weary janitor left. This was Arthur Pendleton, the founder, the visionary, the man who had built an empire from scratch. He moved and spoke with a purpose that left no room for argument. His actions made one thing clear: his dramatic return was not born from a desire for personal revenge. It was a rescue mission. He was a king returning to a kingdom in turmoil, and the work of setting it right had already begun. His humble victory was not in the humiliation of his tormentors, but in the quiet, decisive resumption of his duty. Outside, the justice for the antagonists was swift, public, and merciless. As the whispers and frantic recordings continued, 2 members of the museum's security staff, their faces grim and professional, marched through the crowd with purpose. Their target was Marcus Thorne, who was still standing by the fountain as if rooted to the spot, his mind unable to accept the new reality. "Mr. Thorne," one of the guards said, his voice flat and devoid of the deference Marcus was used to. "You've been asked to leave the premises. You need to come with us now." Marcus, jolted from his stupor, reacted with his now impotent arrogance. "Leave? You can't be serious. Do you have any idea who I am?" The irony of the question was staggering, and a few onlookers let out sharp, humorless laughs. The guard was unmoved. "We know who you are, sir," he said, a subtle edge to his voice. "And we know you are no longer a guest here." When Marcus hesitated, the guards each took one of his arms in a firm, unyielding grip. The fight drained out of him instantly. All his power, all his status, evaporated under the simple, physical authority of the 2 guards. As he was led away from the bright lights of the gala and towards the dark street, he passed the valet stand. The young man to whom he had so condescendingly flipped his keys earlier simply stared at him, holding the Porsche key fob as if it were a relic from a fallen empire. Next, the guards approached Chloe. She was on her knees, her hands covering her face, her body shaking with sobs. Her phone lay on the wet ground beside her, its screen spiderwebbed with cracks. In a final act of digital karma, the live stream was still active, broadcasting her complete and utter breakdown to the very audience she had so desperately courted. The comment section, once filled with laughing emojis at Arthur's expense, was now a torrent of condemnation. She didn't resist as the guards helped her to her feet and gently guided her away. Her career, built on carefully curating an image of untouchable success, had been irrevocably destroyed by one unfiltered, horrifyingly real video. Finally, there was Liam. He stood alone, away from the others, looking small and lost. He had been silent throughout, the sheer shock having rendered him mute. When the guards came for him, he simply nodded, his face ashen. He walked with them without a word, his head bowed, his hands stuffed in his pockets. The brilliant young coder, the self-proclaimed future of the company, now looked like a child being led from the principal's office. The remaining employees watched the trio's walk of shame in dead silence. On their faces was not pity, but a cold, dawning fear. They recognized a part of themselves in the disgraced executives. They had all been part of the culture of arrogance. They had laughed at the jokes, spread the gossip, and looked down on the service staff. Arthur's judgment was not just on Marcus, Chloe, and Liam. It was a warning to every single person there. The party was officially over. The era of impunity at Oratech had come to a sudden and brutal end. In the days that followed the gala, the story of Arthur Pendleton exploded into a global phenomenon. The footage, pieced together from Chloe's catastrophic live stream and dozens of other phones, went viral. News outlets dubbed him the Janitor King and the Billionaire Ghost. He became an overnight folk hero, a symbol for every person who had ever felt undervalued, disrespected, or invisible. His quiet dignity in the face of their mockery was analyzed on news panels, and his dramatic helicopter entrance became an iconic, meme-worthy moment representing ultimate karmic justice. For the antagonists, the fallout was as brutal and public as their actions had been. Marcus Thorne was professionally and socially obliterated. His name became a toxic asset, a case study in business schools on how arrogance can destroy a career. No respectable firm would hire him. He was forced to sell his beloved Porsche and his luxury apartment, his fall from grace a quiet, lonely affair that took place far from the cameras and red carpets he so adored. Chloe Vance's fate was perhaps more modernly tragic. Her entire identity was tied to her online persona, and that persona was now a global symbol of entitled cruelty. She was relentlessly parroted, her tear-streaked face becoming a reaction meme used to mock corporate greed. She deleted all her social media accounts and retreated from public life, but the internet never forgets. The digital ghost of her public humiliation would haunt her for the rest of her life. Liam Chen's story was less dramatic but no less impactful. After being fired, he found himself an outcast. The tech community, suddenly hyper-aware of its own toxic culture issues, wanted nothing to do with him. Stripped of his high salary and the status he had idolized, he was forced to move back into his childhood bedroom in his parents' house. For the first time since he'd become a star coder, he was forced to confront the person he had become, a long and painful process of introspection beginning in the ruins of his once promising career. Back at Oratech, Arthur's return sparked a cultural revolution. The changes were immediate and profound. He started by removing the glowing innovation, ambition, excellence motto from the lobby wall. In a company-wide email, he announced a new core value, dignity. He completely overhauled the bonus system, tying financial rewards not just to performance metrics, but to peer-reviewed assessments of an employee's collaborative spirit and ethical conduct. The corner office, a lavish suite 100 stories in the air, was converted into a communal innovation lab for junior engineers. Arthur himself took a small, modest office on a middle floor, the same one he'd used when the company was just a startup. He became a visible, approachable presence. He eschewed the bespoke suits for simple, comfortable sweaters and slacks. He was often seen walking the halls, stopping to talk with everyone from the lead data scientist to the cafeteria staff, his memory for names and personal details uncanny. He ate his lunch not in an executive dining room, but in the main employee cafeteria, his table often surrounded by a rotating cast of employees who, for the first time, felt they had a direct line to the man who built their world. About a week after the gala, a flatbed tow truck arrived at the main entrance of Oratech Tower. Upon it sat Arthur's old, faded blue sedan. The employees watched in confused silence as a team carefully unloaded it and moved it into the center of the grand lobby. It was placed on a simple, polished granite platform. The next day, a small brass plaque appeared before it. It didn't mention the founder or the company's history. It simply said, "True value is not determined by the container." The car, once the symbol of Arthur's public humiliation, was now transformed into the company's most potent emblem. It was a permanent, powerful reminder to every person who walked through the doors that worth is measured by character, not by appearances. It was a silent lesson in humility, sitting at the very heart of the glass and steel skyscraper. Months later, Arthur was leaving for the day. As he passed through the lobby, he saw a young woman, a newly hired marketing executive, rushing towards the exit, her eyes glued to her phone. She nearly collided with one of the evening janitors, knocking his bucket of water to the floor. The old Arthur would have watched her snap at the man and hurry away. But this time, the executive stopped in her tracks. A look of genuine horror crossed her face. "Oh my gosh, I am so sorry," she said, immediately kneeling down to help the janitor clean up the spill. Arthur watched the small, quiet moment of kindness from a distance. A genuine, peaceful smile graced his lips. He had not just taken back his company, he had restored its soul. His own worth had never been dependent on their approval, but now, he had ensured the company's worth would forever be measured by its humanity. He walked out of the building he had created, got into a modest but reliable sedan, and drove himself home, a quiet man in a world he had, once again, set right. Arthur's story is a powerful reminder that true worth isn't measured by the car you drive or the title on your business card. It's measured by character, dignity, and the quiet strength to know your value even when the world tells you you're worthless. We all have a story about being underestimated or seeing someone else be judged unfairly. What's your story? Share a moment in the comments below where you saw someone's true character shine through when it was least expected. Let's fill this space with reminders that heroes are all around us, often in the quietest corners. If these are the stories that inspire you, and if you believe that kindness and integrity are the ultimate power moves, then make sure you follow our channel for more. Thank you for being here and for being part of this community.